Hey, thanks for checking out The Solid Verbal. Now would be a great time to subscribe to the channel for college football content all off season long.
Welcome back to The Solid Verbal, boys and girls. My name is Ty Hildenbrand, joining me as always, all the way over there in the heart of the Midwest, Chicago, Illinois, fully entrenched in Big Ten territory. Dan Rubenstein, sir, how are you today?
I'm good, Ty. I am good. We have a number of conferences to get through. We have Notre Dame to get through. Future Mountain West power Notre Dame. And couldn't be more thrilled, Ty, because this will hopefully complete and you're going to have to take notes here, Ty, because you keep screwing this up when talking about grand total. This will complete our journey throughout FBS football. Yes?
You are correct. Grand total is the name of the game. You can play it at verballers.com. You got to go through all 69 Power 5 teams, Dan.
There it is.
And pick the over-under. Pick the over-under. At the end, winner gets a Solid Verbal prize pack. You could only play that game, though, at verballers.com. That's our Patreon. You can join for as little as $5. Get in, play our over-under game again called Grand Total. Yeah, as you mentioned, the last episode was the SEC. Before that, we did the Big Ten. Before that, the ACC, the Big 12, and of course, what remained, at least at the moment, of the Pac-12.
Yeah.
So we're making our full journey through here. We're still going to do, I think, a predictions episode, and we've obviously got much more content to come before the college football season starts up here in a few short weeks. But yeah, this is kind of our turn into home. We've got Notre Dame, and then we've got our Group of 5 conferences in their present form, and we're going to talk through, from a very high level, what is interesting, what's fascinating for each of these conferences.
I agree. And don't compete in grand total, by the way. Don't go to verballers.com if you shy away from competition, right? If that's not something you're into, do not go to verballers.com. But if you want to compete, if you want to prove your mettle, verballers.com, look for grand total. It's the only way to go, Ty. It's the only way to travel.
Only way to fly. Verballers.com, again, that's where we offer bonus perks. We've got more bonus perks coming if you are ever so inclined to check those out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe or follow.
Yes.
Whatever your app lets you do. Hit subscribe or follow. We are welcoming all new Verballers under the tent, Dan. Shall we get rolling?
Let's do it.
My goodness. How interesting. How bizarre.
How interesting, how bizarre. That's the name of the game here. We are doing fascinating things for all teams, all Power 5 teams. And now all Group of 5 teams, or Group of 5 conferences at least, as we make the turn into home here and conclude our 6-episode preview series. I, of course, have Notre Dame. I've also got the Sun Belt, a.k.a. the Fun Belt. This year it really is the Fun Belt, as well as Conference USA, which is ever in flux. You've got the American, the Mountain West, and your favorite conference of all, the MAC.
Yes.
Where should we start?
I think we should start in the American just because, well, I guess a lot of these, American and Conference USA, have been through a tumultuous ride with American teams heading to the Big 12 in Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF, and then the American gobbling up, and I hope I have this correct, Ty, because it's a new look AAC, Charlotte, FAU, North Texas, Rice, UAB, and UTSA. Roadrunners.
Yes.
I think we start with the American. I think it's fascinating. It's a huge conference, Ty. It is large.
It's a big conference. Yeah, you said it right. They gobbled up some other teams after losing, honestly, some heavy hitters, right? Cincinnati, UCF, to say the least. I mean, those were kind of two of the power brokers in the conference. And, it's definitely going to look different. It's going to feel different. Doesn't mean it won't be as exciting, because I think we always look for reasons to get excited about Group of 5 football. It's not less than. We don't treat it as less than, even though the system might. But it will feel different. It will feel different that those teams aren't at the top.
Agree. So you want to go through the American, the fascinations?
Let's do it. Tell me.
Well, a lot of new coaches. I think is the big thing with the American is big names coming to the American, leaving the American. Certainly with FAU hiring Tom Herman and the amount of returning production. That's our favorite Bill Connolly, or our favorite thing that sometimes is meaningful and sometimes is not.
Did Did Tom Herman bring the P chart from Texas, out of curiosity?
I haven't gotten into the urinal specific elements of the preview portion of the Owls, but let's assume yes. Because you want to hydrate in Florida. You want to hydrate in Boca. Look, so you have an FAU team that returns a ton and should improve. And they weren't disastrous under Willie Taggart. They just didn't win enough. And so they won enough under Lane Kiffin. And presumably Tom Herman, with what he has been able to do on the recruiting trail and the name recognition in the portal, I think he's going to win. Charlotte hires Biff Poggi from Michigan, like a high school coaching legend, made a bunch of money outside of football, but his roots were more Eastern Seaboard in the Baltimore area, and everybody speaks highly of him for his time as the associate head coach at Michigan. And Charlotte, didn't really quite get it working with Will Healy. You have Mike Houston now a few years in at ECU.
Oh, yeah. Right.
You still have Memphis, you still have Navy, but obviously they're still in a transitionary time with Brian Newberry taking over for Ken Niumatalolo. North Texas moving on to Eric Morris, who takes over from Seth Littrell, who had some success but sort of stagnated there. And you have, who else? Oh, UAB hiring Trent Dilfer. That's a thing.
Lest we forget.
Yeah, that's a thing. Rice comes over, and it's still Mike Bloomgren, who, of course, was hired away from, I believe, Stanford. And JT Daniels is the new face there.
I was waiting to ding it. I was waiting to give you the ding.
By the way, Luke McCaffrey, promising slot receiver for Rice now. He made that transition.
Oh, really?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Well, Rice is interesting.
Still a McCaffrey presence in college football. And UTSA, obviously winning Conference USA last year, looks to be strong to quite strong, returning Frank Harris and Jeff Traylor. I mean, maybe it's his last year in San Antonio with all the success he's had there. And then certainly if UTSA makes a dent in the American in their first season, that's a good sign for Jeff Traylor and his ability either at UTSA long-term or making a move upward. And so there are no divisions anymore. This is division-free American athletic football. But the new names make this, new names both in terms of head coaches and new names in terms of teams joining the conference as things realign on the Group of Five level. It's going to be a big one, Ty. It's going to be a big conference. It's going to be a fun conference. And you still have Tulane returning people. They're a stable team here. They win the conference last season, beating UCF in UCF's final season in the conference. And I'm just excited, Ty. I'm excited for American football. We can get into any of these teams that excite you specifically and try to drill down a little bit more. But no, this conference has a lot going for it just because it has the ability to gobble downward, I guess, if it's the best way to phrase it. And that features those teams.
Yeah, I jotted down cage-free farm fresh because we are removed or unfettered from the shackles that were the divisional structure that governed college football for years. So no divisions. And then there are some fresh teams, a fresh lot of teams coming in. I'm intrigued by the matchup between Tulane and UTSA, potentially as the top dogs in the conference. UTSA, relative newcomer, not just to the conference, but to the sport. And Tulane, of course, trying to keep it rolling. There was some speculation in the offseason that Michael Pratt might look elsewhere, might dip his toe in the transfer portal, but ultimately, did look around, but decided to come back to Tulane. And, a fair amount gone from that Tulane team that obviously played at a very high level in bowl season with USC. But I think enough ammo still there that they're on relatively stable footing. So I'd be shocked if it weren't Tulane as one of the top dogs come season end. And, we've talked about Tulane in some spots here and there. I think Tulane is potentially an upset type of team as they play up against Power 5 competition.
Yeah, so they host Ole Miss early, which should be fascinating. And their home road splits are pretty good, though they travel to Memphis, who should be decent enough, especially on offense. If Memphis can figure out defense, they become that much more dangerous, lost a bunch of close games. So if they can flip a couple of those, that becomes a more interesting Tiger team. They host UTSA to finish out the season. We'll see how Florida Atlantic is, but they travel to Boca relatively late. And I don't know. I think they're in good shape. They still have some playmakers on defense. You mentioned Michael Pratt. Tulane is in good shape, although last season seemed to be the year that it should have and did all come together.
How do we feel about the state of the group of five, by the way? Like, I know there is a fair amount to be sorted out with Oregon State and Washington State and Cal and Stanford. And,
sure.
We go into 2024. I suppose they could be in the Power 5 conference by then. But, like, it felt to me like the playoff system, the way they drew it up initially, where we got 12 teams, one of them goes to a group of 5 team. It felt like that had a lot more teeth to it when it was still Cincinnati and UCF and some of those schools that have now since jumped to the Power 5.
Right.
So one of these teams that we're kind of talking about in passing is going to be an automatic qualifier in that new system. Do you feel like it is a little bit less than, given the moves that have gone on in the last couple months and weeks, or is it still of interest to you to put one of these teams in there?
Depends on the team. I mean, you can make the case that Tulane, in beating Kansas State last year, won the Big 12 in the way that we talked about BYU a couple years ago winning the Pac-12. And so Tulane, with that notch on their belt and then beating USC in their bowl game, I think there's a good argument to be made that the right team can compete in the playoff, right? The Cincinnati team from a couple years ago. Now, look, Cincinnati has always been a different level, but I really do believe that even with some of the top American teams heading to the Big 12 and the definition of Group 5 seems to evolve and morph every single season, I'm still a believer that the right team can make a dent in the playoff, should be in the playoff, even with, the pressure from, a new look Big 12, SEC, and Big 10, that missing the playoff and allowing a quote unquote lesser than team and conference in is detrimental, to the vantage point of these major conferences. No, I still think that it's worthwhile, and the American features the deepest roster, I think, of teams that have the highest ceiling, and that still features Tulane. I still think schools with success in this conference have a ways to go before meeting where Tulane's roster was last year. But, we've seen Boise State teams perform well on the big stage, but you're going back a few years now. So, no, I'm still a believer that the best of the group of 5 becomes quite tantalizing nationally, but maybe not every year.
Yeah, I mean, I asked that question because I know it's going to get people fired.
Of course,
up. Let's be.
I don't even think people have opinions that strongly anymore about it when we expand to 12. Right? There's no scarcity.
I think the implication that the group of 5 is less than tends to get people riled up.
Yeah,
and of course, Tulane for the most part is less than Alabama on the field.
Right.
On the field, less than Clemson or Florida State or perhaps Ohio State, right? I mean, they're not pulling from the same pool of talent. But I don't believe that means they shouldn't get a seat at the playoff table. Like, my argument the whole time has been, okay, if you want to do a playoff and if you want to give this illusion of every team in the FBS having a chance at the national title, then you got to let them play for it.
Sure.
You can't just give them scraps and throw them in a bowl game against a team that, didn't have a better matchup otherwise. That doesn't feel fair to me. This at least feels fair. And hopefully some of the teams that we talk about here will get more of a fair shake at the playoff, and perhaps there will be years where they're going to allow more than just one into the 12-team field. I don't know how likely that is, but I like the fact that it feels to me like we've at least progressed now where they are built into the system. And even if they get drilled every year first round, I'd still rather have them in there than not. Like, it just seems like what's fair is fair. And for all too long, like, remember the excitement around Cincinnati finally cracking that top 4.
Mm-hmm.
And that felt like an eternity, pushing the boulder up the hill. That was a good Cincinnati team too. Think of all the NFL talent that was on that team. So there's no reason to say that a group of 5 team can't build up and get to that point where they seriously contend for something, but you got to start somewhere with at least letting them in the door on a consistent basis and not leaving it up to the polls or the media or whoever. Like, put them in. Put them in and see what happens and adjust from there.
I just believe that I think the the riling up that you talk about is a thing of the past, because you were talking about the BCS era. And so the precious 2 spots, one of them being filled by Boise State feels like craziness to people if you're rooting for a Pac-12 or SEC or Big 12 program, whatever. And so now it seems fine. Nobody's going to be left out. Nobody deserving that is a clear national championship threat is going to be left out and robbed of a spot because Tulane or SMU or Boise State or Fresno State makes it into the playoff. Every team has every opportunity to make it into a 12-team playoff. And so it's fine. But I do think with, since we've evolved from that point of Utah and TCU and Cincinnati now joining major conferences, that I think we're drawing from a different kind of pool of group of 5 teams. Now, the portal can change that. You said they're not drawing from the same pool. They actually are drawing from the same pool. It's just some of it happens via the portal, that an Ohio State player ends up at, wherever, and a Cal player ends up whatever, or, a Texas Tech player ends up wherever. Eventually, it's more homogenous in terms of where players play. But no, I think it's fascinating all the same, because a lot of these teams are able to fortify in ways that they weren't before.
Shall we talk about my beloved Notre Dame Fighting Irish?
You want to start with Notre Dame? No more American thoughts? Any of those teams?
Well, no. I mean, I think my main point of fascination is collision course that Tulane and UTSA are on.
Okay. SMU is interesting to me. Like,
yeah?
Well, SMU with Rhett Lashley, he's hit the portal hard. Obviously, going back to the Miami roster, with his connection as an offensive coordinator there. And so you've got an SMU team, and they move on. Obviously, Tanner Mordecai goes to Wisconsin. Preston Stone is the new guy at SMU. But I think that should be a really interesting, fun offense if they can figure out defense. Near the top, Tulsa hires Kevin Wilson. I don't think they're going to be a big threat right away. Temple's still really down, but showed flashes on defense. USF starting over with Alex Golesh. We'll see what happens with the Bulls. They have a ways to go. Memphis is interesting to me if they can figure defense out, like I mentioned, and they return Seth Hennigan at quarterback. You're right, though, in leaning into Tulane. That Tulane UTSA matchup at the end of the year is going to be fascinating.
Spicy.
Frank
That's
Harris
spicy.
has been in college football a long time, and it's worth appreciating the top of the American looking interesting. I like that. That's all. You want to talk Notre Dame now?
I want to talk Notre Dame, Dan.
Okay.
8-4 last year.
Mm-hmm.
8-4 with Drew Pine last year. 9-4 after the bowl win over South Carolina. So a couple points on Notre Dame. I'm sure I could talk till I'm blue in the face here. Obviously, a rocky start last season, that goes without saying, losing to Ohio State, which everybody expected, but not so much on the Marshall front. If you watched the Marshall game, that was not a good performance by Notre Dame. Then they almost lost to Cal the game after. So it took a while to get this thing going for, I think, 2 main reasons that we need to address here, because it does tie into where things head in 2023. The first was obviously the offensive line. And this was very much a known issue going into last season. All the talk was how they need to, under Marcus Freeman, now build up an offensive line. He wants to run the ball. He said he wants to be a physical team that runs the ball, that plays aggressively, has the attacking mentality right along the defensive line. They did that on the defensive front, but not so much on the offensive front. It just took them a while for them to get that line into a point where it was stable, where it could support a rushing game. Eventually, they did sort it out and did get a ground game that followed suit behind Audric Estime. They absolutely pulverized Clemson in Week 10. Dabo Swinney came out and said as much, right? That was a big-time unveiling of what I think Marcus Freeman's vision is for Notre Dame's ground game. It just took a long time to get there. So they've got that coming into 2023. The line, I think, is sorted out. Obviously, some turnover at running back. Logan Diggs, who was kind of their number 2 back, transferred down to LSU to be with Brian Kelly. But Audric Estime is still there. They've got some other names that I'm really excited about, whether it's Jadarian Price, Jeremiah Love, I just think they have options at running back, and we will see names beyond Audric Estime pop. But they got that part sorted, and that's good now going into the season because I think that's going to be the bedrock for this whole thing. The second reason for the issues last season, obviously the injury to Tyler Buckner. Second game of the year. Buckner goes down. That means it's Drew Pine's team. Now, Drew Pine, in limited action, did give them a little bit of a spark. I think that's why, at least initially, it was like, well, we know he's limited physically, but he at least seems to be a guy that his teammates are willing to play for. And that's true to an extent, but it did mean a pretty drastic shift with how they schemed around Drew Pine. Suddenly a lot more dependent on a run game that initially wasn't there. And with respect to the passing game, it just put him in a box. Drew Pine was not throwing down the field. I had the air yard stats in front of me. I don't right now, but it was well under 8 air yards per pass. And what it amounted to was pretty much everything going to Michael Mayer. If Michael Mayer couldn't get it done through the passing game, or if the ground game couldn't get something going, couldn't get any kind of push, then Notre Dame was really, really hurting to move the football. We saw a lot of that early. But even still, Drew Pine won 8 of his 10 starts. All things considered, I thought a pretty good coaching job by Marcus Freeman in year 1. And that's now what leads us into year 2. First off, recruiting has remained very strong under Marcus Freeman. You can argue that's why they hired him in the first place, right? Again, he pulls in a top 10 class. There is no need to bury the lead, though. The main point of fascination here is Sam Hartman. The best recruiting job that he did was not so much out of high school, it was out of Wake Forest, bringing Sam Hartman over to Notre Dame. I cannot tell you what it feels like to finally have a quarterback. It feels like the first time in forever, Dan.
Oh, no.
As I yell to the sky with my hands up, the first time in forever that Notre Dame hasn't had a starting quarterback who used to be a backup with a little bit of spunk. It feels good, doesn't it?
Sure.
It feels good. By comparison, Sam Hartman's air yards were closer to 12. He's a bit of a gunslinger, which got him into trouble in spots at Wake Forest, but at Notre Dame, it is long overdue to have a guy who could stretch the field a little bit, especially with how physical they ended up being on the ground last season. It's a really big deal, man.
Okay.
It is a really big deal if they can suddenly stretch the field. You've got defenses coming up, wanting to stop Audric Estime, keying on the run. Now, suddenly, if you've got a guy in Hartman who's willing to throw it deep, that changes the equation. It gives them an extra dimension. Who is he throwing to? I'll get back to you. I'll get back
Who's
to you on
calling the
that one.
plays? Is it Dave Clawson? Is Dave Clawson running the Notre Dame offense? No?
It's Jared Parker. It's Jared Parker.
Okay.
By the way, fantasy thing, I know we're not necessarily doing the full live show concept this year, but the relationship between Marcus Freeman and Jared Parker, dating way back to their days as lowly assistants, will absolutely be a topic for conversation, either when Notre Dame is up 40 points or down 40 points, or maybe trailing by 4 points late in the game. They will find ways to work that into the equation because it's too good to pass up.
Ty, I can't
Heard
go
it here first.
I can't go anywhere here on Chicago's North Shore. Forget even that. I can't go the West Coast, East Coast. Everybody tip of their tongue is just Marcus Freeman, Jared Parker talk everywhere I go, Ty. So great,
They
savvy
carpool
selection.
to work together.
Okay.
Listen, just take my word for it.
Okay.
You will get sick of hearing about how close these guys are as friends.
Okay.
That being said, my first big question about Notre Dame is at the receiver position. One of the things I know Pete Sampson has written about, I know others have written about it as well, but one of the big differences between Sam Hartman and a guy like Drew Pine or even an Ian Book, these guys were not Sam Hartman in that Sam Hartman throws guys open. Sam Hartman sees the field. Sam Hartman knows where the space is. Sam Hartman throws to the space, and he's hopeful that his receivers will get there. Now, who the receivers are, they've got big number 83, your boy Jaden Thomas. So-called big number 83. He is your guy. Outside of that, I mean, I think it's a free-for-all, whether it's Chris Tyree in the slot, who is still there, who I know they'd love to get in space, whether it is Deion Colsey, who's got the big frame, whether it's a younger guy like a Jaden Greathouse, whether it's Tobias Merriweather, who I would have loved to have seen more of, but he only had one catch last year for 41 yards, whatever it ended up being. So they've got guys, and they've recruited pretty well there. Talent should not be an issue, but it's a matter of who can they put out there that's going to get open and find that space that Sam Hartman's going to throw to, and who can catch the ball. Frankly, they had a problem with that last year. Who can catch the damn ball? First point of fascination with Notre Dame. Not just Sam Hartman, but also the receivers, I guess, too. I lied. The second thing for me, third thing for me, I should say, is now defensively, there's been a lot of attention on their defensive line since there was turnover there. Notably, Isaiah Foskey broke the school record for sacks. Who's gonna fill in for that? I think they've got enough depth along the offensive or defensive line. Excuse me. I just don't know if they've got the experience to make us feel confident about it. So, like, Jordan Botelho is a name that I think steps in and should have a pretty good season, replacing Isaiah Foskey, more of a third down specialist type last season. They're eager to get him into kind of an every down role. They also went out and they brought in Javonte Jean-Baptiste, who was a rotational guy from Ohio State. He seems to also fit pretty well from a skill set standpoint along the defensive line on a per play basis, was crazy productive, just didn't get a lot of snaps because he was buried in the depth chart at Ohio State. So I like what they've got up front, even though it's not as experienced. I think they're sound at linebacker. I think they're really good in the secondary between Benjamin Harrison, who probably gets some All-American comparisons, Cam Hart, who's a senior, but figures to hopefully lock down the other side of things. Maybe questions at safety, but my other point of fascination just broadly is what happens along the defensive line, because Notre Dame needs to get a pass rush in order for this thing to work. And there are some new names that I think are going to try and establish that this season.
Okay. So who's catching balls? Who's rushing the passer?
Who's catching balls? Who's rushing the passer? And the final thing I will add here on Notre Dame, as I'm sure people are tired of me waxing poetic.
No, look, nobody knew the 77th best player on Notre Dame until you started this preview. Continue.
I know. The other thing that I will add is that it is a fascinating schedule, because
that's true.
There are 3 monster games in Ohio State week 4 at home, USC week 7 at home, and Clemson on the road week 10. I will say the schedule looks harder now than it did when we did our schedule preview way back when, because as I've had a chance to dig into some of these other teams now, it feels like some of those filler teams that kind of make up the schedule in between those big guns, I don't feel as confident in those as wins as I did before, right? Like, you can make a case that going to NC State, going to Duke, going to Louisville, hosting Pitt, those are not easy games,
no,
by any stretch. And we can obviously talk more about those as we get closer to each of those weeks, but it just feels like each of those teams has something to prove, and they always get up for Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Notre Dame's over-under is 9. Their over-under is 9. I think that is the perfect number. I think they could be a top 10 caliber team this season. They could easily lose one of those big 3 games. They could easily lose all 3. They could also lose to any of those filler team, quote unquote filler teams. NC State, Louisville, Pitt. Pitt always plays them tough. Notre Dame, I think, will be judged by 2 things this season. First off, what does Jared Parker do with Sam Hartman at quarterback? The second is, how many of those big 3 teams do they beat? How many do they beat? Because if Marcus Freeman comes out of that stretch only beating one of the 3, I think there will be a fair amount of disappointment in the Notre Dame community. Even if they go 9-3 otherwise, or 10-2 otherwise, they've got to beat more than one of those big guns, I think, for Marcus Freeman to be fully entrenched in the Notre Dame community and for Notre Dame fans to accept him as their guy forevermore. And that's a high bar.
Sure.
I think they're good enough for it. I really do. But it will not be a picnic.
It's also an interesting quarterback schedule for Notre Dame with the teams you mentioned.
Yeah.
And maybe the most interesting, Ty, you glossed over, Phil Jurkovec in South Bend. Folks, that's pretty good, right? So we've got Cade Klubnik, Phil Jurkovec, Caleb Williams, Riley Leonard, Brennan Armstrong. It's a nice little stretch. Whatever happens at Wake, obviously Dave Clawson has developed quarterbacks. Stanford is probably going to be pretty easy considering where their roster is at this moment. I don't know, man. By the way, it's worth glossing over, but I believe Central Michigan has Bert Emanuel. Is that his name? Bert Emanuel? He ran for like 290 yards in a game playing quarterback for Jim McElwain and the Chips. I'm not saying it is a sandwich moment. Notre Dame should cleanly win that game. But in terms of the quarterbacks faced, Notre Dame's got a roster ahead of them.
This is a schedule that's built for a playoff run. It is built for a playoff run. They play a fair amount of really big teams. Most of the teams in between are bowl teams. And so getting to 9 wins, I think, will be a challenge. I would like to see Marcus Freeman win 2 of those 3 big guys, though. Even if there are losses otherwise, which would be disappointing in their own right. But to now set a new high water mark with all the talent that he has infused the program with, you got to get 2 of them. Got to get 2 of them.
I might take the under.
I wouldn't bet the over. I wouldn't take the over for Notre Dame.
Yeah, I might.
And I think in grand total, because we only used half games, I think it's 8.5. I'd feel confident with 9.
Okay.
I think 9's a good number, but I don't know. Getting over 9, getting 210 will be tough with this schedule. It just will.
All right, fair enough. Where do you want to go next?
Let's talk about the Mountain West.
Okay, would love to.
You made a comment earlier about the AAC being the deepest Group of 5 conference now in this new reality.
Yeah.
And I'm curious as to why it's American and not Mountain West.
Would love to
the
talk.
American lost some big guns.
Yeah. So the Mountain West is 2.5 teams deep. The Mountain West is Boise State, Fresno State, and we can have a conversation about Air Force because of their defense. Air Force has won a bunch of games. They lose key dudes on offense, including their quarterback last year. They win a bowl game, an impressive bowl game. The Falcons do last year. Boise State starts slow, but finishes. Talon Green is a revelation at quarterback when he's healthy. Fresno State is starting over in a number of places on offense. You know, it's a Logan Fife, Mikey Keene battle at quarterback, and Jeff Tedford certainly seems to have an eye for coordinators, and they're starting over there on offense after losing their offensive coordinator to, I believe it's Mizzou. But aside from Fresno and Boise right now, you're talking about a Wyoming team that has been pretty decent on defense but can't figure out offense, a Utah State team that fell off a cliff last year after winning the conference 2 years ago, UNLV starting over with Barry Odom, and they actually took some nice strides under Marcus Arroyo and recruited well enough, and they're going to be a destination because obviously Las Vegas is a nice place to end up as a transfer if you're looking for somewhere warm and interesting. San Jose State has been inconsistent. Siobhan Cordero's still there, Ty. Siobhan Cordero's still a college football player. He transferred from Hawaii a couple of years ago. San Diego State still can't figure out offense and took a step back on defense last year. New Mexico was catastrophically bad. They were the worst offense in America and now start over-ish because Rocky Long, their defensive coordinator, former head coach at San Diego State, he moves over to Syracuse to take over that defense. Nevada's interesting to me because they've done a good job in the portal. Ken Wilson was there forever, was at Oregon for a few years coaching linebackers under Mario Cristobal, and he's brought some Oregon players there. Their roster was a nightmare last year because of how many players left for Colorado State with Jay Norvell. But Nevada's at least interesting. I think they can take some steps forward on offense. Hawaii has a ways to go on both sides of the ball, especially on defense with Timmy Chang. Fresno I mentioned, and look, they've won some big games. This was a team that after Jake Haener got healthy last year, just started running through the Mountain West. It was great to see, but especially at skill positions this year, there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of new faces. Colorado State has a ways to go. They just do under Jay Norvell. They were just catastrophically bad at times last year. And the roster was, and I use that term again, but the roster was in a rough shape. And then Boise State. Boise State has a lot of new faces on defense, but there's still a little bit of star power on defense. And offensively, they should be in a very good place with Talon Green getting that full off season as the incumbent starter at quarterback. And the only issue with Boise State and being high on the Broncos is their schedule is rough. And I don't even like the Mountain West all that much, top to bottom. They open at Washington, they host UCF, and then they're at San Diego State, at Memphis, all in September. So in the sage, wise words of Ty Hildenbrandt, the way that Ty Hildenbrandt looks at the sport, you're going to know a lot about Boise after September. It gets better from there, thank you, but it's still at Fresno and finishing against Air Force. So it's at Fresno in early November and then finishing against Air Force in Boise. So it's a schedule full of landmines, if not good teams, because of what their September looks like with Memphis, UCF, and Washington and Seattle. And then traveling to San Diego State, which I think is fine. San Diego State is fine. I just don't think they are fielding the defense that they did 3-4 years ago, and certainly not featuring a running back on the level of, Rashard Penny or Donnell Pumphrey, guys like that from the past 10, 12 years. Yeah. So there's not a lot of identity to San Diego State with Brady Hoke, in his second term as Aztec head coach. So if Boise State can weather that schedule and Fresno State can develop dudes on offense, which is not a difficult thing to foresee with Jeff Tedford, I think we can get a repeat of the Mountain West Championship game. It's a conference full of half teams, which you can say about a lot of Group of 5 conferences, that it's tough to build a complete team with a Group of 5 roster. But no, I think the Mountain West will likely look a lot like it looked last season. So that's where I am with the Mountain West in this moment.
Repeat for me Boise's September slate.
At Washington, UCF. They play against North Dakota. At San Diego State. At Memphis.
Wow.
So
they're kind of like the Boise State Seminoles in that they've got a schedule that's very top hit or very front loaded.
Yes,
top hit.
It is a front loaded. It's sort of like a traditional Kent State schedule. If you remember those Kent State schedules, we're like, they're playing Georgia, Washington, and Oklahoma. Cool to start the year. But yeah, I think Boise, I think Andy Avalos should be given sort of the benefit of the doubt with defenses. He's super creative in the way that he, has uneven fronts and bunches dudes up. He's very good at confusing quarterbacks. And so even with new faces, I think they should be put in a position to succeed pretty quickly.
I'm curious about Boise. I am.
Yeah.
I feel like it took them a bit to figure out what they wanted their offense to be last season, but once they did, and once it was more of a dual threat version of what they were running before, once sort of they found their quarterback and realized it wasn't going to be Hank Bachmeier, it feels like they got better. And I think share your optimism around Andy Avalos.
So we agree.
We agree.
There's only, by the way, in terms of the American and Mountain West, only Tulane is in the coaches poll, checking in at number 23. UTSA is somewhere like 29. Troy is in there. I'm sure we're going to get to Troy at some point. Fresno State is in the 30s. Boise State in the 30s. So Boise and Fresno, at least in the coaches poll, are the clear 1-2 of the Mountain West in this moment.
Let's go to the Sun Belt.
Let's do it.
I'd love to talk Sun Belt because quietly the Sun Belt is sort of amassing a very, very interesting roster of teams.
Yes.
And I don't know if it is quite to the point, I know it isn't to the point yet, where it is not a conference of extreme half teams. It's not there yet. Still mostly the case. But as Bill Connolly points out in his preview that he put together for the Fun Belt, quote, I don't ever want to touch the Sun Belt. It's perfect.
Yeah.
Geographically sensible and competitive. Mm-hmm. At least 3 of its current members have finished in the SP Plus top 75 for 5 straight years. I think he is speaking more specifically about the Sun Belt East, but I will broaden it to the Sun Belt as a whole.
Sure.
Because there's a reason we call it the Fun Belt. It is a fun conference, and it makes for fun football. Last season, it was Troy over Coastal in the championship game, 45-26. If you believe the preseason media polls, that's a thing that you're into. They've got James Madison, JMU, against Troy in the title game.
Ooh.
The East Division, it's sort of like the baby Big Ten. The East Division is way more competitive than the West. And, in total, maybe 6 teams that we could have a conversation about them potentially getting into that title game, winning their respective division. But it's just fun football. It's fun football, man. Here's one for you. There are 14 teams in this damn conference. Only one coach is new.
I love
Only
that.
one new coach. Yeah, they're all back. The new coach is your boy, Tim Beck.
Oh, great.
Tim Beck's back, Dan.
Yeah.
On a related note, I will not be picking Coastal because
Please don't.
Tim Beck is the hire there. We can get into that momentarily. Another one. Let's call out Georgia Southern.
Okay.
You know who coaches Georgia Southern?
I do.
Clay Helton, right?
Of course.
Last season, Clay Helton transitioned away from a team that was running the option. And y'all know how that works.
Oh, look at that. Throwing in
Usually
a y'all.
it goes, y'all. Yeah, that's right. We're in Atlanta. Y'all know how that works, Dan.
I do.
It's sometimes the kind of thing that goes a little bit sideways when you try to move away from the option.
Mm-hmm.
But Clay Helton hit the portal very hard. He essentially contracted out a passing game. We talked about Kyle Van Treese, or Van Treesen as we referred to it last season a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
They jumped 80 spots in the SP Plus on offense, and they ended up making a bowl game. So good on him. He again went very hard at the portal this offseason for what it's worth. I think the defense could be in trouble, but the offense may be fun. The offense is still going to be kind of fun for Georgia Southern. So outside of those two, I think that made me the most interested looking back. JMU is in a really good spot. JMU was a first-time FBS competitor last season, and they were good enough to make a bowl game. They didn't, but that's for other conversations about the NCAA and how they work. But JMU is, I think, this season going to be a story about good lines and defense. One of the few group of 5 teams that we talk about, perhaps, that is going to be having defense as a strength, which is not a commonality. That's not to say they're going to be like top 50. I don't think they'll be that good, but lines and defense for JMU will take them places in the Sun Belt. Marshall is, Marshall beat Notre Dame last year. Marshall beat Notre Dame last season. I like the way that Marshall is built. The problem is that they got to replace their 3 best players this year. And so that'll be interesting to see how they fill in those gaps. They, again, were working the portal. Coastal Carolina lost its coach in Jamie Chadwell to Liberty. Liberty, by the way, now in a conference. We can talk about them momentarily. Grayson McCall's still back, coming back for another tour of duty on offense. I think the defense could be catastrophically bad. Just saying. Could be really
I love
bad.
This term.
Yeah, just not getting great vibes about the defense, but offensively they'll be fun. I don't know what the Tim Beck version of the offense looks like. And I know when I read Bill's preview, he was probably more artful in how he described the Tim Beck system than you and I would have been. He tends to describe it more as Tim Beck wants to throw short as often as he can and get away with it, which does not strike me as the pyrotechnic, multivariant version that Jamie Chadwell liked to run, where he kind of ran all the systems in one. That is not the Tim Beck system. So I hope the system does not take a step back. And Bill was quick to point out that when Tim Beck has a quarterback, generally he does pretty well. I think he's got one with Grayson McCall, but I don't know if Grayson McCall will do well in this new system. We'll just have to wait and see. On the App State side of things, Dan, I'd love to know who's playing quarterback.
Yeah.
Whether it's Ryan Berger, whether it's Joey Aguiar, that to me will be kind of an open question. Georgia State's got Darren Granger back at quarterback, dude who just loves to scramble. He's a point of fascination for me. I love dudes that just scramble.
You're just fascinated by dudes.
Okay, settle. Old Dominion, I like Jason Henderson, their linebacker who led the nation in tackles with 164 tackles.
I love tackling machines. Yep.
ODU and Ricky Ronnie took the approach of not working the portal at all, kind of going with what they had, which I guess we'll find out how we feel about the ODU recruiting department. Beyond that, like as we shift our focus to the West, as I said, the West I don't feel is as competitive as the East. It's a 2-horse race. It's a 2-horse race between Troy and South Alabama. Troy has more guys to replace, but I think a better schedule and probably a better defense. South Alabama has a dude named Yam Banks in the secondary, which let's ding that one. Who doesn't love a good yam? I mean, let's be real. Out on Louisiana here, they kind of bottomed out last season on offense, and there's no immediate path that I see for them to fix it in the short term. Some dings here if we just go through rapid fire. Other teams in the conference. Southern Miss still is Frank Gore Jr.
Mm-hmm.
That makes me feel, that makes you feel very old.
He's not new. He's been around.
He's not new, but they still have him.
Yeah.
He's getting older, which means we're getting older. Mm-hmm. And I don't like the way that feels.
Okay, fair enough.
Both now in our 5th decade of life. But Frank Gore Jr. is at least a point of intrigue on offense. Defense was great last year under Austin Armstrong, now the Florida defensive coordinator, right? Had a cup of coffee elsewhere. Now he comes to Florida as well. But Southern Miss defense took a step forward. Texas State is also very interesting. Texas State is doing the transplant thing that Western Kentucky did a couple of years ago. You remember that when they kind of contracted out everybody from, what was it, Houston Baptist?
Mm-hmm.
That was how they Bailey Zappi, and they're kind of doing something like that here.
Right.
GJ Kinney is the new coach. He comes over from Incarnate Word. He brought his coordinators and a bunch of guys with him. So the question that I think a lot of folks have is, okay, if we transfer, like we saw Cam Ward come over from Incarnate Word to Washington State last season, what happens if we take all the guys?
Yeah.
What happens if we take all the guys, bring them over, put them into a power, or I almost did it again, a group of 5 conference? What happens? Texas State is nothing if not intriguing. Also a very underrated logo if you've not seen it recently.
Of course.
And finally, just to kind of close things out, we've got another point of intrigue with Arkansas State and ULM. We've got 2 coaches that you know of. We got Butch Jones, running Arkansas State.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got Terry Bowden running the Warhawks of ULM. Arkansas State loses its entire offense.
Good.
They might be giving the ball to JT Shrout. You remember him from Colorado.
Mm-hmm. And Tennessee.
ULM, I think, could also still be very bad. It is very much a difficult project for Terry Bowden. But they've got Tyrone Howell out wide, who's an elite 6'2", framed, deep ball type of receiver, who at least makes things interesting.
Man,
that's where I'm at.
The South Alabama story is great. What Kane Womack has done there. Obviously, you remember them being super close against UCLA last year. I want to say their offensive coordinator is Major Applewhite. So
right.
Well-traveled Major Applewhite.
Right.
Georgia Southern from the East. I'm just trying to remember things that fascinated me about any of these teams. Probably responsible for Scott Frost getting fired when he was, because you lose at home to Georgia Southern. First-year head coach Clay Helton. It's probably not going to get demonstrably better, and it didn't. Willie Fritz gets very excited about Sunbelt defensive coordinators to the tune of hiring 2 of them, having one of them taken from him, with Miami hiring Lance Guidry away. Guidry from Marshall, and then I think it was Tulane hiring Troy's defensive coordinator to replace the short-tenured Lance Guidry. App State lost its offensive coordinator, did they not?
Yeah.
Then we have future Virginia head coach Kurt Signetti at James Madison, looking to win 8-9 games a year, because if you do that, you're probably going to get hired away with the new FBS team. Yeah.
The JMU story did not get enough love. It did not get enough love.
Tried.
It was their first. We tried. And I suspect many other podcasts tried as well. But in the national media churn in college football, JMU, again, they just got here, Dan. They just got to FBS, and they were good enough to be in a bowl. I mean, they were a really good team last year. And Todd Centio is gone, right? They're gonna have some replacing to do at quarterback, but they're really sound along the lines. And if you're going to be sound anywhere, doesn't matter what level. That's a pretty good place to start.
I agree. And Marshall, I mean, I like to joke about them, but look, if Charles Huff keeps winning, Charles Huff will keep climbing the coaching ladder as well.
He will.
He was super well regarded during his time at Alabama and I believe Penn State. I want to say he was at Penn State.
Yep.
So no, Sun Belt's fascinating. You're right that the East is just a mess and must-see TV.
Why don't you close out your side of things with the MAC, Dan, your favorite conference? You love picking MAC teams in bowl games.
I do. I love picking against MAC teams. And I was wrong this year, more than I thought I would be. The MAC is something. I don't know what it is. I'm rooting for Akron just because I like Joe Moorhead teams, and so they improved last year. They were not very good last year, but they did improve over the course of the year. The story with the MAC continues to be Toledo, DeQuan Finn is back, a playmaking quarterback, and they've won a bunch of games. Western Michigan starts over. They fired Tim Lester, and they went from being really interesting under PJ Fleck, and game day was there. Offense completely fell off a cliff. So they're starting over. NIU returns, ready for a name tie, Rocky Lombardi.
Wow.
Class of 2017. Really? Yeah, he got hurt last year, and I think he got an injury waiver. So he enters his 7th year of college football, Rocky Lombardi. And
he's on the Ottman Bell plan.
That's true. 2021 was very good for NIU, though. He had some good games. Eastern Michigan continues to be dangerous and good, and so good for Chris Creighton and the job he's done in Ypsilanti. I mentioned Bert Emanuel at Central Michigan and the Chips, and I don't think he's going to be throwing it 30 times a game, but he is a ridiculous runner, and so hopefully Jim McElwain and his staff can develop him because Central Michigan has been down. Miami of Ohio in the East, Chuck Martin does nothing but field pretty good defenses. Brian Kelly got Ty Chuck Martin.
Oh, yeah. They were together for a long time.
Has been a solid coach, is probably, and I was reading Bill Connolly talk about this somewhat, is sort of a very, very conservative mind on offense to the detriment of Miami of Ohio's chances to win a winnable conference, a winnable MAC year over year.
Right.
So an interesting team, but all the same, let's hope for some more fun from Miami of Ohio. Your guy Chuck Martin at Ball State continues to field decent defenses, and I was reading Bill Connolly and his evaluation of Ball State, and Bill was very polite, but there was the undercurrent and the undertone of he is an old man in terms of offensive thinking and going for it and being conservative. And so Ball State has had a ton of success under Chuck Martin, but they need to revamp things on offense a bit. There's a Rourke at Ohio, which should surprise nobody. I believe this is Curtis Rourke, if memory serves.
Yep. That's right, with a K. Curtis
Rourke. So they've had injury issues. The Bobcats have. Obviously, it's been a transition since Frank Solich left. But Ohio certainly has a high ceiling and is one of the better teams in the East. Kent State loses its head coach to Colorado and a ton of players, but they look to the Craig Bowl and PJ Fleck tree to get things sorted out, but that is a reclamation project in its beginning stages at Kent State. Mo Linguist certainly still at Buffalo. The defense has had signs of life. Mo Linguist, yeah.
What a great name.
So, of course, 2 years ago, he took over for Lance Leipold, who took the Kansas job late in the process in springtime, and so Mo Linguist came over from a brief stay at Michigan. We'll see what happens. Scott Loeffler and Bowling Green doesn't look like things are trending in the right direction. Here's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping for a fun Ohio, which usually we get on offense. I'm hoping for an improved Akron. I'm hoping for a more complete Buffalo. I'm hoping for signs of life from a Ball State offense. Bert Emanuel, excuse me. I'm looking forward to Rocky Lombardi's retirement plan, his retirement tour at Northern Illinois, and a ton of DeQuan Finn at Toledo. How about that?
Yeah. Close things out with Conference USA, Dan.
Let's.
UTSA won Conference USA last year over North Texas. Now, we talked about UTSA moved conferences, but UTSA goes out on top of Conference USA. This is kind of a trend. A lot of teams move through Conference USA on their way up to other conferences, and perhaps we're going to have more of that this season. There are 4 new schools in the Conference USA this season. Conference USA, for what it's worth, made it clear in the preseason that they did not want their abbreviation to feature a hyphen.
Yeah, hyphenless.
So instead of C-USA, now it's just CUSA, like CUSA.
Mm-hmm.
CUSA.
CUSA. Yeah.
That's right. All one string of 4 characters. For their 4 new schools, we've got Liberty and New Mexico State joining, along with Jacksonville State and Sam Houston, who come up from FCS. Now, interestingly, Jacksonville State is Rich Rod.
Yes.
And that team knows how to score points. Liberty was Hugh Freeze, now Jamie Chadwell. New Mexico State, I believe, is Jerry Kill.
Mm-hmm.
He's working on that reclamation project. So this is a 9-team conference now, which actually works out pretty well for scheduling. I know everybody's trying to get to an even number now, but maybe Conference USA has the right idea. I don't know if they intended it to be just 9 teams, right? That's just maybe the way it worked out. But 9 teams actually works out quite well for scheduling. This is not a conference that I think is going to produce any Titans this year. If it were up to me, I would probably have Liberty at the top of things in Conference USA. As for the other schools that comprise this conference, we've got schools like Middle Tennessee. We've got schools like Western Kentucky, who obviously are very formidable. In addition to Louisiana Tech and UTEP. And of course, FIU, right? Those are your 9. I favor what Jamie Chadwell, I think, has at Liberty. And I favor Western Kentucky. Those, to me, figure to be the 2 top dogs. Beyond that, though, I will be super intrigued, of course, to see how Jacksonville State and Rich Rod do, moving up, how Sam Houston does, moving up. These are not teams that necessarily are built with both offensive and defensive skills in mind. Right. You generally get one or the other. So from my standpoint, the real point of intrigue is just the fact this is a conference that, again, is adding new teams, that I think we've got 2 teams at the top that figure to be better than the rest. Maybe Middle Tennessee would have a bone of contention with that assessment. But I think if you're trying to handicap things right now, it's Western Kentucky and newcomer Liberty.
Fair enough. Yeah.
That's where I'm at.
All right. And that's our preview. That's our Group of 5 preview. That's our Notre Dame preview. And there's a lot between, I would say, the new teams in the American, new teams in Conference USA, the Sun Belt East, the hope and prayer for there to be 4 or 5 good teams in the Mountain West. There's a lot here. There's a lot of meat on the bone. Hopeful improvements, especially if we can just get a bunch of fun offenses in the MAC. I'm totally good with 48-45 Tuesday nights. That's fine. I don't need... I actually encourage 108th ranked defenses in the MAC. That's fine by me because it produces good TV and I will watch. So I'm good with all of this, Ty. The big names, I mean, you just mentioned Rich Rod and Jacksonville State, but big name coaches in Tom Herman at FAU. Like, there's just a lot to love about this season and the chaos that I think will happen within a lot of these Group of 5 games.
Yeah, and also just some... just to kind of close the loop on
that corporate loop, Ty.
Yeah, I mean, like just some interesting coaching names.
Yeah,
in Conference USA, Mike McIntyre is with Florida International.
Yeah, that's a tough.
Mike McIntyre, who we talk about as like a pejorative with respect to Colorado. He had one good year, but obviously kind of went out on a bit of a down note. Rich Rodriguez is there. Jerry Kill is working on the project. Like Sonny Cumbie is at Louisiana
Brady
Tech. Like,
Hope,
these are
part
all
2.
names. Part 2. Rick Stockstill still there at Middle Tennessee. Right. So these are not new names from a coaching standpoint. It's just a matter of, I think, trying to put together a conference that is a little bit more well-rounded and not just all one side of the football.
I agree.
That brings us to 27 fascinating things.
Boom.
About Notre Dame in the Group of 5. Let us know what we missed. solidverbal@gmail.com is the email. Make sure you hit us up on social media. If you made it this far in the episode, if you've got Twitter or X or whatever we're calling these social media networks
throw us some
these days.
zeets.
Yeah, throw us a zeet. Send us a picture of where you listen to the Verbal.
Yeah.
where you're listening right now, at this moment, send us a picture. We'll
Do you want
retweet, repost, rezeet your message.
If the answer features a picture of somebody's pants crumpled at their feet, clearly on a bathroom floor, is that something you want confirmed, or is that something you say, why don't you hold on to that?
Maybe hold on to that one.
Just making sure.
Maybe hold on to that one. But everything else, provided it's PG.
Okay.
We're at Solid Verbal on social media. That does it for our previews, Dan. Wow, we made it.
Love it.
Made it the whole way through.
Can't wait.
Check us out at verballers.com. Much, much, much more to come for that guy over there, my good friend Dan Rubenstein, for myself, Ty Hildenbrand. Thank you for downloading, for listening, playing along with our madness at home. We'll talk to you soon. Stay solid.
Peace.